Imagine this. A powerful queen, tired of her throne, finds herself carrying a forbidden child, half royal, half human, hidden from the eyes of the empire. As her enemies close in, she's forced to make a choice: surrender to the empire's laws or fight for the future of her child. With a heart full of fear and determination, she joins forces with a servant who sees her not as a queen, but as a woman desperate for freedom. As the empire's ships descend and the child awakens, a battle begins that will shake the foundations of the galaxy. Will the queen's rebellion survive, or will the empire crush her dreams forever? If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. In the grand hall of the Astral Empire, the night was alive with laughter, music, and the soft glow of crystal lights. The vast room glittered under the shimmering chandeliers that seemed to pulse with energy, casting radiant patterns across the polished marble floor. The nobles, dressed in their finest robes, danced in circles, their movements graceful yet predictable. The sound of glass clinking and distant chatter filled the air as servants moved swiftly through the crowd, carrying trays of glowing drinks and exotic fruits. But at the center of it all, sitting alone on her high golden throne, was Queen Eloria. The queen's golden skin shimmered under the lights as if made of pure light itself. Yet her eyes, deep and endless, told a different story. Her gaze wandered across the room, but it was not a gaze of interest. It was the gaze of someone who had seen it all. Someone who had tasted every luxury and fought every battle, and yet still felt an emptiness inside her. Eloria had ruled for centuries, seen thousands of worlds rise and fall, and crushed countless enemies. She was powerful, respected, feared, and yet tonight she felt nothing. The sounds of the celebration around her seemed distant, muffled. She watched the dancers spin in synchronized movements, their bodies flowing like water, but it did not move her. She saw the nobles laughing, their voices loud and jovial, but their laughter felt hollow. They laughed not because they were truly happy, but because that was what they had always done. There was no real joy in their hearts. Eloria knew that feeling all too well. She had worn that mask for too long. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft flutter of silver banners overhead, which shifted in the breeze that moved through the hall. The banners were beautiful, changing color with each passing gust of wind, but even their delicate beauty couldn't capture her attention for long. She had seen it all. There was nothing new, nothing that could excite her anymore. Her golden eyes swept across the room, scanning the crowd, looking for something, anything, that could spark even a flicker of curiosity. And then, for the briefest moment, her gaze stopped. Her eyes locked onto a figure in the corner of the room. He stood alone, holding a tray of empty glasses, his simple dark gray clothing a stark contrast to the rich and elaborate attire of the nobles around him. He was a human, one of the many who served the nobles and the royal court, but unlike the others, he did not move or speak unless he was needed. His stillness was unlike anything she had seen in this room full of fake smiles and empty chatter. She studied him for a moment longer. There was something about him, something different. He didn't seem to care about the music or the laughter, just as she didn't, but there was no fear in his eyes, no subservience. Instead, there was an unspoken understanding, a quiet strength, in his posture that made Eloria pause. It was almost as if he knew exactly who she was, yet he didn't care. Without even realizing it, the queen found herself leaning forward, her curiosity piqued. "Bring me that one," she ordered softly, her voice barely audible over the music. The guard beside her blinked in surprise. "The human?" he asked, confused. Eloria nodded. "Yes, him." Moments later, the human was led before her. He did not bow, as was customary, nor did he show any fear as he stood before the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. Instead, he met her gaze with calm confidence, and Eloria couldn't help but feel a strange sensation stir inside her. Most creatures trembled before her. They feared her power, her rule, her gaze. But this human, was different. He did not flinch or look away. There was no reverence in his eyes, only quiet strength. "What's your name?" Eloria asked, her voice cool yet filled with an unspoken challenge. "Idris," he replied, his voice steady. It was not deep or soft, but balanced, as if he was used to speaking with purpose, without hesitation. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, half expecting him to respond with the usual flattering words or fearful reverence. "Yes," Idris answered simply. "You're the queen." Eloria waited for him to say more, to express awe or fear, but he simply watched her, waiting. It was not what she had expected. She leaned forward, intrigued. "Why do you look at me like that?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Because you look lonely," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Eloria blinked, surprised. No one had spoken to her like that in centuries. Not even her closest advisors, not even her lovers, had ever dared to voice such a thing. They feared her. They played their games, flattering her with words that they didn't mean. But this human, this servant, saw something in her that no one else did. She wasn't just a queen to him. She was a person, and for the first time in ages, Eloria felt something stir in her heart, a feeling she had buried deep within her, something she had long ago pushed aside, a loneliness that had followed her through the years, that she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. "You're brave," she said softly, still unsure of what to make of this strange connection. "Or foolish," Idris replied with a small smile. Eloria laughed, a real laugh, sharp and bright. The hall grew quiet for a moment, as if even the music had paused to listen. The dancers stopped mid-spin, and the nobles glanced up, wondering what had caused the queen to laugh so freely. But Eloria raised her hand, dismissing their curiosity, and the music resumed. "Walk with me," she said, standing from her throne. Idris followed her as she moved through the side corridors of the palace, away from the laughter and the noise. They passed glowing pools of water, silent gardens, and walls of gold that whispered secrets of the past. She spoke of wars she had fought, of planets she had conquered, of cities built on the bones of fallen civilizations. And Idris listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flatter. He simply listened, as if he understood her better than anyone else ever had. "What do you dream about, Idris?" Eloria asked, turning to face him as they walked. "Home," he said quietly. "Fire, a child's laughter." Eloria stopped walking, her mind reeling at his words. "You don't fear me," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I think you want someone who doesn't," he replied. For a moment, Eloria was silent. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her. A feeling she hadn't experienced in centuries. A spark of connection, of understanding. And in that moment, she realized that this human, this stranger, had somehow reached a place inside her that no one else had ever touched. With a small, almost imperceptible smile, she reached out and touched his face, a gesture that surprised even herself. And without saying another word, she led him to her chambers, where the night would change everything. The days that followed Eloria's meeting with Idris were unlike any she had known. The queen, usually focused on her empire and its endless demands, found herself preoccupied with thoughts of the human servant. His quiet presence haunted her mind. She could not understand it, but something about him had shifted something deep inside her. She had spent centuries ruling the empire, surrounded by advisors, lovers, and warriors, but none of them had ever made her feel the way Idris did. He made her feel seen. Eloria had spent her life wearing the mask of a ruler, strong, untouchable, feared, but Idris saw through that mask. He had seen the loneliness she had buried deep within herself, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she had longed for someone who could truly see her, someone who didn't bow, who didn't flatter her, who didn't play games. Idris had done none of that. Instead, he had simply spoken the truth. The queen tried to shake off these feelings, reminding herself that she was the ruler of the Astra Empire. She had responsibilities, duties that no one else could fulfill. She had conquered planets, built cities, and crushed enemies. But as much as she tried to focus on her role as queen, her mind kept wandering back to Idris. One evening, when the weight of her duties felt especially heavy, Aloria found herself walking through the quiet corridors of the palace, once again seeking solitude. The grand hall had been alive with the usual festivities, a celebration for a visiting foreign dignitary, but she had left it all behind. She couldn't bear to be surrounded by fake smiles and empty laughter. The hum of distant voices faded as she walked deeper into the palace's heart, into the silence she had grown accustomed to in recent years. It was then that she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Idris. She had not seen him since that night they had walked together in the gardens, but she felt his presence now, like a quiet force beside her. She paused, and he caught up with her, his movements as calm as ever. "You always seem to be alone," he said, his voice steady. "Is it because you prefer it that way?" Aloria turned to face him, the question lingering in her mind. She had never been one for small talk, but his words held weight, as if he truly wanted to understand her. "Do you think I prefer to be alone?" she asked, her voice low. There was a vulnerability in her tone that surprised even herself. Idris's eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was no need for words. "I think you're afraid of being alone," he replied. "But you don't have to be. Not anymore." Aloria felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. She had spent so long pushing people away, building walls around her heart, convinced that she needed to be alone to maintain control. But now, standing before Idris, she wasn't so sure. "Why do you say that?" she asked, her voice soft. "Because," Idris began, his gaze steady, "you've been carrying this burden alone for far too long. The weight of the crown, the weight of the empire. But you don't have to carry it by yourself. I'm here." Aloria's heart skipped a beat. She had never allowed anyone to get this close to her, to see her for who she truly was. But Idris wasn't just anyone. He wasn't afraid of her power. He wasn't intimidated by her title. He was simply there, offering her something she had never known she needed. "Companionship. Why are you saying this to me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You're just a servant. You're not bound by the same responsibilities I am. You don't understand what it's like to carry this weight." Idris took a step closer, his presence calm but undeniable. "Maybe not," he said, "but I understand loneliness, and I understand that sometimes the weight of it can break a person. You don't have to carry it alone, Aloria." The queen stared at him, her thoughts swirling. She had never allowed herself to consider such a possibility. She had built her entire life around the idea that she was untouchable, that her heart was a fortress no one could breach, and yet here was this human, this servant, offering her something she had never imagined she could have. Understanding. Connection. "You don't fear me," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "No," Idris replied, his voice soft. "I don't. And I think that's what you need." Aloria felt a rush of emotions flood through her. Fear, confusion, longing, and something else she couldn't quite place. But in that moment, she realized that Idris was right. She had been alone for far too long, hiding behind the walls of her own making, and now standing before this man who saw her for who she truly was, she felt something stir deep within her, something she had buried for centuries. "Come with me," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "There's something I need to show you." Idris nodded, falling into step beside her as they made their way through the palace corridors once more. This time, however, the silence between them felt different. There was no tension, no uncertainty, only a quiet understanding that seemed to bind them together. As they walked through the winding hallways, Aloria found herself opening up to him in a way she had never done before. She spoke of her childhood, of the weight of the crown, and of the emptiness that had plagued her for as long as she could remember. Idris listened, never interrupting, never judging. He simply listened, offering her the gift of his presence. It was the first time in years that Aloria felt like she could breathe, like the weight of the world wasn't crushing her from all sides. She didn't have to be the queen for a while. She could just be herself, flawed, human, and full of the same emotions that anyone else felt. As they reached a quiet balcony overlooking the palace gardens, Eloria turned to face Idris. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to hide behind her royal persona. She was just a woman, standing before a man who saw her as more than a ruler. And in that moment she realized that perhaps, just maybe, there was a chance for something more between them. Something that neither the empire nor the crown could ever take away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Idris smiled, his eyes warm and understanding. "You don't have to thank me, Eloria. I'm just here, and I always will be." And for the first time in a long while, the queen felt hope stir in her heart. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of urgency. Queen Eloria knew that she could not keep the truth hidden forever. Her growing child, half human, half royal, was an impossible secret, one that threatened the very foundation of the empire. The laws of the Astra Empire were clear. Hybrid children were an abomination, and any such child was to be destroyed before it could even take its first breath. Eloria had defied the laws of her people by allowing the child to grow inside her, but she knew that she could no longer ignore the reality of the situation. The empire would come for them. It was only a matter of time. One evening, as the cold wind howled through the palace corridors, Eloria met with Idris in the shadows of the royal gardens. They were standing on the edge of the moonlit courtyard, the night silent except for the soft rustle of the trees. Idris looked at her with quiet concern. Eloria had been distant lately, her mind preoccupied with the growing threat. But tonight, the weight of the decision she had been avoiding hung heavy in the air. "We can't stay here," she said softly, her voice steady but full of resolve. "The empire will come for us. They will never accept this child." Idris nodded, his gaze unwavering. He had been prepared for this moment since the queen first confessed the truth about the child. He had promised her that he would help her, protect it no matter the cost. And now, with the walls of the empire closing in around them, it was time to act. "I know," he said, his voice calm but tinged with a sense of urgency. "We leave tonight." Eloria's heart raced at the thought of leaving everything behind. The palace, the empire, her title as queen. It was a sacrifice that felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, she was not running away from her responsibilities as queen, but running toward the future she had longed for, the future with Idris and their child. Together, they walked through the silent palace corridors, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. They passed empty halls and closed doors, the weight of their secret pressing down on them with every step. Eloria had always been in control, always the one giving orders, making decisions. But now, she was the one following Idris. He knew the way. He had spent years as a servant in the palace, learning every hidden passage, every secret tunnel that wound beneath the empire's grand buildings. As they approached a hidden doorway deep within the palace's heart, Idris glanced at Eloria. His eyes were filled with determination, but there was also something else in them, something softer. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. Eloria took a deep breath, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. The child inside her had already changed everything, but now she realized she was ready to face the unknown. She was ready to fight for a future where she could live without the burden of the crown, where she could raise her child without fear. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. They stepped through the hidden door and into the dark passage beyond. The air was cool and damp, the walls lined with ancient stone that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless generations. As they moved through the winding tunnels, the sounds of the palace grew distant, replaced by the soft whispers of the underground. This was a place Eloria had never ventured before, a place hidden from the eyes of the empire. It was a symbol of her departure from the life she had known, a step into the unknown. The tunnel led them to a small, discreet docking bay on the outskirts of the palace where an old, forgotten ship rested in silence. It was small, unassuming and completely different from the grand ships Eloria had once traveled in. This was not a royal vessel, with its shining gold and polished metal. This ship was ancient, its hull covered in layers of dust and rust, but it was perfect for their escape, silent, fast, and undetectable. Idris moved quickly, preparing the ship for takeoff. Eloria watched him with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. She had never seen him so focused, so determined. This was the man who had promised to protect her, and now he was leading her to freedom. As the ship's engines hummed to life, Eloria felt a sense of finality settle over her. She was leaving everything behind, the empire, the throne, her title as queen. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel sadness or regret. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace. This was the beginning of something new, something she could never have imagined before Idris had come into her life. The ship lifted off silently, leaving the palace behind. Eloria looked out of the window, her gaze lingering on the distant lights of the empire she had once ruled. She wondered if she would ever return. The thought of it didn't bring the fear it once would have. She had chosen this path, and now, there was no turning back. They flew through the dark skies, the stars above them shining like distant promises. Eloria's heart beat faster as they left the empire's borders behind, crossing into the unknown. The child inside her stirred, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. But even as they flew toward freedom, Eloria knew that their journey was far from over. The empire would not let them go so easily. There were hunters out there, silent, deadly agents of the High Council, who would stop at nothing to bring her back, to destroy the child she carried. But Eloria was no longer afraid. She had made her choice, and with Idris by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. As the ship soared through the night, Eloria looked at Idris, her heart swelling with a feeling she had never known: trust. They were no longer bound by the chains of royalty, of duty. They were free, and nothing could take that away. For the first time in her life, Eloria felt truly alive. The days on the run had worn Eloria down, but her determination remained unshaken. Idris had guided her through forgotten places, taking her to planets that seemed as ancient and desolate as their mission. Every star they passed seemed like a distant memory of a life she had once known, but no longer felt part of. The fear that had once ruled her every decision now faded into something else, something more profound. It was the weight of a new responsibility, the feeling of holding the future in her hands, and that future, she knew, was her child. But the shadow of the empire never stopped looming. Even in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, they had not been able to escape it. Eloria knew that the empire would come for them. The High Council would not allow a queen's bloodline to endanger their rule. And with the child inside her, a child that was part human and part royal, Eloria knew the empire would do whatever it took to destroy them. One day, as they made their way across the rugged terrain of the abandoned planet of Eryx, the quiet came like a storm. The silence was deep, unnerving. Idris had been silent for days, as if sensing the storm ahead, and Eloria had stopped asking questions. The child inside her had grown stronger, its energy coursing through her veins. She could feel its presence more clearly now, as if the world itself shifted with its every move. It was no longer just her child. It was something more. Eloria stood at the edge of a rocky cliff, looking out over the barren landscape. The wind howled through the jagged mountains, carrying with it the scent of dust and forgotten history. The planet seemed abandoned, a place untouched by time, but Eloria could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. She turned back to where Idris stood, his eyes scanning the horizon. His posture was tense, and his hand rested on the pulse weapon he had crafted. He had been more protective of her these past few days, as if he knew something they didn't. Eloria approached him, her heart pounding with an uneasy feeling that had taken root inside her. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no need for formalities anymore. No more titles, no more royal masks. Just the truth between them. Idris turned to her, his face grim. We can't keep running. They'll find us eventually. We need to make our stand. Aloria nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had known this moment would come. She had been running for too long, hiding from a past that would never let her go. But now, standing on the edge of this lonely world, she realized that there was no more fleeing. It was time to fight. Not just for her child, but for the future she believed in. A future where the Empire's oppressive laws could be challenged, where love could exist freely between all beings, no matter their origin. The sky above them darkened suddenly, and the air grew heavy. Aloria's pulse quickened as she felt a shift in the energy around them. She had spent too many years in the palace to not recognize the signs of an approaching force. They're here, she whispered, her eyes narrowing. The Empire has found us. As if on cue, a fleet of ships appeared in the sky, their dark forms cutting through the atmosphere like jagged knives. The ships were silent, their sleek bodies designed for speed and stealth. Aloria felt a surge of fear grip her heart, but she quickly pushed it away. She had no time for fear now. Idris's hand went to the pulse weapon at his side. We need to move. They won't give up without a fight. Aloria looked at him, her expression determined. No. This ends here. We fight. The ship they had been using to escape was hidden in a nearby valley, but there was no point in running anymore. The child inside her had changed everything. She was no longer just a queen fleeing her kingdom. She was a mother protecting her future, and she would fight for that future with everything she had. As the fleet descended, soldiers poured out onto the rocky terrain, their black armor glinting under the fading light. Aloria stepped forward, her heart beating faster but her resolve stronger than ever. The soldiers spread out in a wide arc, encircling the two of them. Their leader, a tall figure cloaked in dark robes, stepped forward. Aloria recognized him immediately. Trell, one of the high enforcers of the Empire. You cannot escape, Aloria. Trell's voice was cold, cutting through the still air. The council demands your surrender. The child must be destroyed. Aloria's gaze met his, unflinching. I will never surrender. Not to you, not to the council. This child is not your enemy. It's the future. You are foolish, Trell sneered. Your rebellion will only bring destruction. You are breaking the laws of the Empire, laws that have stood for centuries. The child you carry is an abomination. Not anymore, Aloria said, her voice steady. The Empire is built on lies, and I will not let it destroy what is right. The soldiers advanced, their weapons raised, but Aloria stood her ground. Her heart raced, but her mind was clear. Idris stood beside her, his expression unwavering. They would not back down. They would not run. The battle that followed was brutal. Aloria fought with a strength she had never known, her movements graceful and lethal as she struck down enemy soldiers one by one. Idris moved beside her, his pulse weapon a blur of light as he incapacitated the soldiers who dared to come too close. But even as they fought with everything they had, Aloria could feel the weight of the moment. They were outnumbered. The Empire's forces were too great. And then through the chaos she heard it. The faint cry of her child. It was soft, but it resonated deep within her chest. The cry was not just a sound, it was a call. The child was awakening. Its power, its presence, was now fully felt. Aloria felt a surge of energy course through her. She looked down at her stomach, her eyes wide with realization. The child was more than just a hybrid. It was something else entirely. And as the cry echoed through the air, the soldiers hesitated, as if something in the very air had shifted. Even Trell, standing at the edge of the battlefield, seemed to falter. Before Aloria could react, Idris moved to her side, his hand firmly gripping her shoulder. Now, he said, his voice low and urgent. We end this. Together they stepped forward, a force unlike anything the Empire had ever faced. The child inside Aloria was more than just a part of her. It was a force of nature, something ancient, something powerful. And in that moment, Aloria realized that the Empire's hold on her life was over. The future had arrived. The Empire would never be the same. and neither would she.